So collaboration is not a natural act, but this is my great collaborator here, Jan Morrison, and she's been named as one of the top 100 women in STEM, and she's extraordinary, and she's going to tell you a little bit more about Fab Ed and STEM.
Good evening, everybody. It's a bit like coming home for me, I have to say. It's just such fun. 30 years in school and then walking out to form ties to try and help the situation in science, technology, engineering, and math in this country for all kids. When we talk about students in schools, we are talking about all students. We are talking about your children, your siblings, your grandchildren, and your students. And in this country, that's been a long haul for us over the last 4 decades. So when we're talking about our schools, we mean that there has to be equity. And TIES was formed to bring a different kind of engagement with kids in the classroom. Probably very similar to what goes on in this school and in others similar to it. That is not what you find in schools around the country. And as Sherry has said, and as Neil has indicated as well, it's not a choice anymore for our country. Our students have to be STEM capable, and they have to be able to take the challenge of enabling them to let their lives speak, right? Isn't that the tenet? I have to tell you, that's something that we should shout from the top and from everywhere we can go. If we're in this business to allow and enable and let their lives speak, then everything that we're talking about tonight is not just what MIT can do. It's not what Massachusetts has supported, and it's not what our country supports. It's what we all have to do for our children, and it's everybody's children. So collaboration is not a natural act. We don't go at this naturally. Enlightened self-interest is. And what we've learned in the business of bringing innovation to education is we better take care of that enlightened self-interest, or nobody's going to be there. Nobody stays with it. And we have that great big Chinese menu of education projects and that swirl of acronyms that nobody can remember, except maybe the time during Sputnik, which we want to all relive for some reason. You know, I was around, and I think that some of you were around. Do you really want to do that again? I don't want to do that again. I want to do it better. I want to be better than that. So when we're talking about the collaboration between Fab Foundation and TIES, we're talking about a new kind of vision, a new iteration. But let's go back for a second. We've said that we've used the term STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. If you notice, there's no period after each of those letters. In the centuries past, at one of the local institutions, there was a Harvard Committee of 10 that came and wrote the Elliott Report. And as a result, we had biochem and physics, the layer cake, we call it. Is biochem and physics how the world is divvied up? Well, at that time, it was an important change, and we changed our schools accordingly. We are now talking about science, technology, engineering, and math as a transdisciplinary endeavor that is driven by the way nature and the world around us asks us to investigate and to inquire. So there is no period after. And it isn't anything that is just relegated to K-12. When you look at the face of STEM, there's no biochem and physics in that word, is there? And these are all major inventions that we all depend upon. Nanotechnology is a discipline. Where is nanotechnology? Is nanotechnology taught here? Anybody, teachers here? Who's a teacher, by the way? I want to see the teachers. Okay, so teachers in the audience at your school, nanotechnology? No. Biochem and physics? Life science? Excuse me, physical sciences. This is what we're talking about, not what we're actually doing. There's that great divide that Sherry was talking about. But why is it important? It's important because of the statistic that you just saw about workforce, but it's more important than that. It provides for, when we're talking about excuse me, STEM education, we're talking about providing a kind of education that meets the demands of what the world is asking of our children. What the Neil Gershenfelds of the world want for their students. That is not an admissibility. That has to be something that is absolutely seamless. We also know that as a country, we do not organize well in education. We organize around all kinds of things and all kinds of mobilizations. But in education, we tend to long for, I have a cold, I'm sorry. We tend to long for what was, not what we can do to develop. We have a new system of how to look at STEM education. We have 3 points of action that we've mobilized as a country around the question about what are we in the world going to do to enable our children to be STEM capable, to have STEM access, and to want to do it. Really, do your kids really want to go into these fields? Let me tell you something that's interesting. In the state of Maryland, which was one of the largest producers of physics teachers, in the last 8 years, they have produced 5 physics teachers. In the state of Ohio, 2. Physics teachers used to be the people, I'm a physics teacher, right? Used to be the people who were all excited and energetic and running around, and we did all kinds of things. We can't even get them. We can't even become them. So how do we organize ourselves? Through statewide managed networks. Our states have to drive the innovations in education that are going to actually enable us to work on what's being produced before us and will make its way into a classroom. When the federal government gets into the business, the computers break down, right? Okay. We're not going to do that. So the states themselves have done that, and there are a number of statewide STEM networks, and this is just one of the maps of the multi-state network that has been created by the states that have decided that it isn't okay that the kids don't want to do this. It isn't okay that the education doesn't meet the need of the workforce. And finally, it isn't okay that there aren't access points for all children. The second part of the theory is educating our youngsters is not the job solely of the educators. It is not the job solely of parents. It is the job of business and industry, higher education, nonprofits, faith-based communities, and in the end, all of us. But especially the end user. The end user in our country is business and industry, not really higher education. It's a very small percentage. So therefore, it isn't just okay for business and industry to have career days in STEM. In fact, those career days are probably as deleterious to the health and welfare of STEM than anything else, because that allows our corporations to say, we're okay, we did it. We had those career days. We're helping. We're making a difference. They're not making a difference at all. So if you look, corporations like Raytheon, the big defense company that does defense modeling, said, what would it take? Well, suppose we take our modeling that we use for our defense program and we dump in all that STEM education research from 40 years. Let's just dump it in. And we're going to mix it around and use our models. What do we find? What we found is that there were some things to know from that education research that we in a million years would not have known if they had not taken the business that they do, their core business, and applied it to STEM. So the new theory of action for these companies is to take what they do for a living and to enable it in the classroom. Once they do that, then operations like Fab Foundation, Fab Ed, ties, the work that the Center for Bits and Atoms is doing is actually enabled, not sometimes by funding, oftentimes because it becomes a community endeavor where GE is involved in it, or National Instruments with LabVIEW and the coding that they're enabling. The final theory is to create STEM schools throughout our country. We do not know for sure what is the best way to teach STEM education. We think we know. And there's lots of innovation. You heard about lots of innovation. Our districts in our country right now, they are so hard pressed to put any innovation into their, to move in. So what if we created STEM schools, incubators all over the country, 1,000 of them, let's say, and we went ahead and changed the DNA of the schools, and they prototyped, and they then, what worked, would then disseminate and would scale to the districts. And we are about 8 years into this, and so far, so good. These STEM schools that touch their districts have done a fabulous job. Many of them are driven by the design process, not by the scientific method. Science teachers in the room? What was it like to try, I also taught biology, what was it like to try and get that independent and dependent variables into your 4th grade? It was really hard. And controls? Where was the control? All I knew is we blew up volcanoes on a regular basis. And we did all, it is not the place. School is not the place for the scientific method. However, it is absolutely the place to ask the questions and to push innovation and to think about iteration and all of that. And that's what the STEM schools have done. One of the biggest and the finest STEM schools is MC² STEM High School. This is in Cleveland. This is a school, it's just a high school, but it has a lottery admission. Their first year of working, they invited 8th graders to apply, and they got a full 120 kids to apply. Almost all of them barely passed 8th grade. There was lottery system, no criteria to get in. Within the project-based work, solely project-based, classrooms that support projects, capstone projects. 9th graders within 8 months took the 10th grade math test in the state of Ohio and passed it. Passed it in a district that never passes those kids. So what else was at MC²? What else was at MC²? Fab Lab. This is what I like is the best story. So how did we actually become this odd couple? And it's a great story because I had been reading about Neil for a while. And he had a little darker hair at that point. And said at one point we were developing MC² STEM High School. I was the senior consultant for Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And I said to my program officer, Dave, let's go see this Fab Lab in Brookline. I think Brookline, right? Yeah, let's go see this one that's in the brownstone. Let's go visit Sherry, let's go see Neil, and let's go see. And he said to me, Bill isn't going to fund this. And I said, well, okay, Bill's not going to fund it. Let's go anyway. So we came, we met, we looked. I saw and I watched high school students using Fab Lab to teach middle school students. And I watched the different ages and the interaction. And I said, they're understanding the mathematics. They're applying their understanding of the underlying phenomena in physics. They are understanding the role of technology well beyond what I thought we could expect. And all of it was happening toward the production of a product that had real world significance. And what I said was, that's it. We're done. We're out of here. We're in Fab Lab at MC². Called Sherry up and said, we found the funder. We're a go. We're going to do this. And gave her a whole week's notice. She packed up all the PhDs from the Center for Bits and Atoms. Remember that? And I mean packed them up. They came and they spent a week 24/7 installing the lab, teaching and everything. And we had what was the equivalent of a Fab Lab barn raising. And the governor was there and everybody was claiming that this was the best thing that they ever saw. And oh my gosh, the kids are so lucky to have this. And what we knew is that this was the start of the way to actually start to think about this. That it isn't okay to just talk about what our kids need. You had to go into some kind of action. But it has to change the way the teaching happens at the school. So it's not just that Fab Lab sits there and that it's a great catalyst for kids doing all kinds of projects. It has to change the interaction. I don't know if you can see this. It says protocols. I'll be happy to give you your innovative thinking. What are the guidelines? Remember those labs that we have all done or that we wrote? And at the top it says unknowns, and what do you get at the bottom? It's like baking brownies. What does brownies say at the top? Brownies, and what do you get after you do that? Brownies. Protocols are not science. Protocols are not innovation. Fab Lab dispels that. You have to understand and the mechanisms before you, but it asks you to interact. It asks you to think. It is also part of ingenuity. It's not a term we use in school very often. And I looked through your materials, Cambridge Friends, I didn't see the term. And yet I am sure that you have very clever kids here. Ingenuity is different than innovation. It's using that imagination and creativity to be productive, like you see here. Fab does that for every kid because it doesn't matter how much you know, how much you don't know, there are access points all over it. And this is my pet peeve. It just strips out the black boxes. And I always use the same slide to talk about black boxes. The first thing in life that we interact with in the sciences, in instruments, is when we're real little and somebody sticks us in a place we don't want to be stuck, and they say to us, "You're hot," right? And we have fever. And we associate that instrument, that piece of equipment, with the fact that heat, it has something to do with heat. And from then on, our understanding of it is just about that. So when we're about 18 months, 2 years old, whatever we can remember, that's about it. That's how good we get on that. Not how a Galilean thermometer offers it or the way that a Fab Lab would help you to construct it. And what Fab Labs do is that they offer that to classrooms and to schools, and that is something that we can't go back on. Now, finally, in our country, just this year, we have a set of standards that are being offered to states that actually support this kind of thinking. Performance-based, thinking that engineering belongs in classrooms, thinking that science ought to be a cross-cutting approach, which is what we're talking about. It is a Fab vision. And Massachusetts has been ahead of the country to begin with your framework. The framework in standards came in at the year 2000. I used to carry it around in a purple file envelope because no other states or anybody else understood what Massachusetts did. So you already had this, but now the nation is being offered this in a much more substantive way. And this is really important. Whether or not we at independent schools subscribe to standards is almost irrelevant. The world does. And in past, we've had such an incredibly minimal and reductionist view of the world through our standards. This is the opposite. The National Academy of Science, National Academy of Engineering, National Research Council, all were part of creating that. So what does this look like? What does it look like in schools when you have kids actively engaged in Fab and in this vision of what digital fabrication can bring to youngsters' lives and to community? This is one of my favorite slides. Anybody, what class are they in? What do you think? What class? This is Mandarin Chinese. This is Mandarin Chinese. The Mandarin Chinese teacher in this school, this size, barely speak English, figured it out, just took as much, I'm surprised she hasn't done Fab Academy yet. I'm sure that's on the horizon for her. And she just went to it. She was convinced that her students doing projects in the Fab Lab would learn the language to a much greater degree. And indeed they have. So in Cleveland, Ohio, in the schools, they learn Mandarin Chinese in Fab Labs. But One of the important stories, and we're telling stories this evening, I have to watch the time a little bit here, is that the young gentleman on the right there, he actually resides at one of your universities here right now. That is David Boone. David came to MC Squared STEM High School from 8th grade thinking that there had to be something different. He signed himself up. He took 3 buses in the morning and 3 buses home in the evening. And he just set the world on fire, and he was the first in the Fab Lab, grabbed it, move it and shake it, and could tell you why he was doing what he was doing. And slowly over his first year in the school, we started to not see him. Couldn't find him. He'd show up at odd times. And when he did show up, he didn't look right. He went into the second year, it got worse. As it turns out, David was homeless in Cleveland. And he wandered, sometimes to family or friends, most of the time to the homeless shelters. And he worked through his 4 years at MC Squared with Fab Lab in the center of his life, and eventually came to live in the principal's basement. Whether that's legitimate or not, we're not sure, but he graduated. And he graduated having taken college courses using Fab as the basis in the Ohio State system. He had 60 undergraduate credits when he came to Harvard. And he walked into Harvard in engineering with a junior status. And his experience was Fab. And that kid says right now, and he's been on BET and all kinds of networks talking, and he says, but for Fab, it doesn't happen. On the left is Andrea. Andrea is in community college. She's going to go to the University of Pittsburgh next year, and she's walking in as a junior. And it's her experience in Fab that's giving her the opportunity. Now, we all use her. Sherry borrows her. She works for me. We send her all over. She's going to go to Egypt shortly because she has bootstrapped and become a Fab guru. And that's a term that we haven't used tonight, but she's definitely on the path to that. And we keep saying the University of Pittsburgh better treat her right because we all care about her. And we know that what we're facing are the grand challenges for our country as they've been laid out by the National Academy of Engineering and many other countries in the world as well. The President's Council on Advisors on Science and Technology have made recommendation after recommendation, and as you see in this report that they did, you see that computer specialists are the future, are the number of job openings coming in the thousands. You can see the number. The number of engineers is increasing, and the gap is huge, as Sherry mentioned to you, and it's very important. And lo and behold, in our country now, we have a strategic plan in STEM. We're not going to fund it, but we have it. And it talks about improving everything that you've heard about from Neil's comments and through Sherry's, and very important. But it's interesting, it's not just our country. It is all over the world that we're experiencing this gap in education. And right now, our country is helping Egypt to develop their new country. And the way we're doing this is we're building 5 STEM schools. And what's at the basis of all those 5 STEM schools? Fab Lab. And in fact, Dina is in the audience here. She's right back there. She runs the community Fab Lab in Egypt that is supporting the schools, our STEM schools that are in Egypt. And we've all been over there and we're working with them. And you see that the face of STEM and education, they're doing very same things. Doesn't matter. There are no borders on Fab Lab. There's no border on these stories about kids. What we're creating through Fab is a way to help our children to make sense of the world and to be student-centric. And we've used that term forever. And in fact, it's almost embarrassing to use it anymore. Except, really, that's what this is about. School doesn't look like what Ben Franklin offered us for public school. It looks like the Fab Lab. And it's been wonderful to spend any time with you tonight. Thank you very much. And I'm sure we'll have a chance to answer questions, and that we're going to spend some time in the back at the 3D printer.
what a wonderful, inspiring, stimulating discussion we had. We began by, in my introductory remarks, talking about the relationship between Quakerism and the scientific method. And I think it's a good idea to talk about, and perhaps bring things to a conclusion, talking about a Quaker philosophy of education. Now, a philosophy of education has to begin with questions. And the questions are, what is the purpose of school? And what type of person do we seek to develop through education? Our answer has to be more than we want to develop the whole child. And our answer ought to be more than to prepare children to enter the workspace. I mean, think about it. Our pre-K children this year will not graduate high school until the year 2025. Now, if I think back to my own 8th grade, I was in a high track for science, and at the conclusion of that year, we received slide rules, something that I did not use much later on in my scientific endeavors. We have to think about what our children will have to know for a future that we can't quite predict. But it's not a complete unknown, because we know that there are certain skills our children are going to have. And a key one is connecting existing ideas, connecting existing things in the world around us into something new. So a principal goal of education needs to be to create young people who are capable of doing new things, not simply repeating what our generation and previous generations have done. And we keep that foremost in our mind at Cambridge Friends School. We need children who invent new ways of putting things together, of putting ideas together. So a goal has to be to develop men and women who are creative, inventive discoverers, who can be critical and verify and not accept everything that is put in front of them. Fab Labs, maker spaces, are experiential environments to develop children like this. We also believe at Cambridge Friends School that human beings have the capacity, they have the desire, and the obligation to make the world a better place. And we believe that schools should be viewed as transforming institutions that measure our success in large part by how our graduates contribute to the world. And by that measure, we are very successful. But this obligation doesn't all fall on the student. This obligation is an institutional obligation also. Cambridge Friends School is a private school, but it's a private school with a public purpose. We can look at our school in many ways. We have a generous financial aid budget, which makes our school accessible to many people who otherwise might not be able to benefit from a private school education. Our students and faculty contribute through community service efforts, but we must do more. We can view our school as itself as a laboratory. It could be a laboratory that provides insights, new insights into teaching, new insights into learning for the benefit of other schools, public and private. At Cambridge Friends School, we now have the opportunity and the obligation to develop models that could contribute to the improvement of education that extend beyond our walls. We can look at sharing our insights, sharing our energy, sharing our resources beyond our campus. We can design, we can implement, we can evaluate, and we can share our resources and our experience in a way that could result in potentially replicable models of education. And we will, particularly in the area of STEM education. Stay tuned.
Thank you.